What's worse, holding out hope for something that might never happen or never having the guts to do it in the first place? We'll explore this question in my review of The Island of Last Things by Emma Sloley, a novel that invites us to witness a world unraveling and to hold space for hope, resistance, and transformation.
Really holding space with that and feeling power in that.
That's really powerful.
But before I get to that, hey, my name is Frank. Welcome back to my channel where I talk about all things bookish. So before I dive into my review, I do want to just say welcome to all of my new subscribers from my last video. It got a lot more attention than I was expecting, and definitely a lot more attention than I am used to getting on this channel. So welcome. I'm glad that you're here. I do just want to say it is not a very common thing for me to make videos making social commentary about things happening within the bookish community. I do it every now and again when I feel the need to speak up about something, but ultimately this is a channel for book reviews. So I hope that you are able to manage your expectations when it comes to what I have to say and what this channel is about. So I'm happy to have you here regardless. Thank you all for your support, and let's get into the video. Now, if you haven't read the book, this story unfolds in a near future dystopian world in which this fungal blight has basically wiped out all of the flora in the world and has collapsed pretty much every single ecosystem, leading to the mass extinction of thousands of different species. Now, the story focuses on Camille, our main character, who is a zookeeper at the last zoo in the world, Alcatraz, which I'm sure you've heard of it. It is a former prison, and in this story, it has been repurposed as a zoo. So we open up to Camille explaining the logistics of how the keepers of the zoo are assigned their daily tasks in caring for the animals. So the day that the story begins, she is assigned with giving the new keeper a tour of the facilities. And this new keeper's name is Sailor. We learn that she has come from the Paris Zoo. And through the course of the book, we learn that she was actually fired from this Paris Zoo because she was smuggling animals out. Now, the same day that Sailor actually starts the job, the zoo is also acquiring a new elephant named Titan from another zoo in Singapore that had recently closed, leaving Alcatraz to basically be the last zoo in the whole world. Now, one of the first images that struck me is Camille's description of Sailor's arrival. She's talking about the fabric of the social makeup of this zoo because, again, they're on an island. This former prison is on an island. They don't often interact with people outside of their mini ecosystem. So I'm going to read you a quote of how she describes the events that are happening that day. On a normal day, we all would have been abuzz at the arrival of a new keeper. The whole intricate social puzzle would need to be taken apart and reassembled to fit this new piece, this potential ally or rival. And while some keepers hated the disruption of the status quo, I lived for them. Every new person was a small blast of helium into my balloon of hope. So, something that I really enjoyed about this was the metaphor of the social puzzle and everything like that. I feel like it was a very unique way of describing how it all fits together, especially when you take into account how events unfold and how Sailor has othered herself from the rest of this small community over the course of the book. And I'll get into that in a little bit. Now, I also enjoyed the imagery of Camille describing her feelings of hope as a balloon, as if Sailor was breathing air into it, breathing helium into it. You don't breathe helium. Anyway, you know what I'm talking about. You get it. So that kind of brings me to one of my main points and one of the main things that I really did enjoy about this book. And that is that Emma Sloley has a very unique talent for the use of metaphor and simile in this book. It was very rich. It was a very unique imagery. And I enjoyed it because a lot of it made sense. It was something that, while it might not be common metaphors that you would hear, it's still visually, if you were to picture these things, they are very nice images. You know what I'm saying? So I think that Emma Sloley's prose was very beautiful. It wasn't too much. She wasn't over indulging in the use of metaphor and simile throughout the book. I feel like anytime she was doing it, it was in moments that were really trying to draw a certain point home for the reader. And I did thoroughly enjoy that. Now, building off of this idea of hope that Camille has with the new arrival of Titan the elephant, which everybody is so excited about, and the arrival of Sailor, the new keeper, there is a harsh reality that we kind of reckon with from the very beginning of the book, and that is that this zoo and zoos in general, in especially in this world, in this version of the world, are prisons, not just for the animals, but for the keepers themselves. So early on in the book, Camille says, the admins dictate the rules and the guards enforce them. Civilized authority backed up by the threat of violence. One of the oldest arrangements. There were also rumors about a dungeon cell used for holding unruly employees in solitary confinement. Now, this description it touches on the broader theme of authoritarian control within this small ecosystem that is the Alcatraz Zoo. And it shows us how power is maintained through fear and violence. There are armed guards throughout the entire structure of the zoo. And theoretically, they're there for if people are trying to break into the zoo and steal animals, which does happen, and I'll get into that as well. But it also exposes how fear and control are maintained not only through the threat of physical violence, but through this psychological element of the constant potential for violence to always be there. And I think that's something that a lot of us can relate to in the current state of the world. Because if you think about it, that's kind of how power is maintained a lot of the time. It's just as much of a psychological thing as it is a physical threat. So, something to think about. I did like this because this is something that Camille hints about throughout the book. It's not just this one of these opening moments. It's throughout the book she is illustrating how the administration and the guards are not there to actually protect and help the animals. They're there to make money because at the end of the day, this zoo is owned by the Pinktons, who are these multi-billionaires that have a lot of social and fiscal power in this world. So something else that I really enjoyed is how Emma Sloley masterfully blurs the lines between humans and animals and kind of reminds us of our interconnectedness and our similar origins. Now, she does this a lot through the use of metaphor and through simile, but sometimes she just outright makes connections between certain humans and animals. So I'm going to go ahead and read you a quote of something that I think exemplifies this quite well. And it is towards the end of the book when Sailor has returned at some point to San Francisco, and she is watching a woman in a fancy car drive by with a pet rat. And they're in the window looking out. So, inside the car, a woman in a bright pink coat had her nose pressed to the window, and she was holding up a sleek white rat to the glass, as if it had requested to watch the world go by. Sailor could have sworn the rat met her gaze, its pink nose twitching and eyes gleaming with the secret knowledge of its own kind. So, I think this moment challenges that human animal divide, and it invites us to see ourselves as part of the animal kingdom, part of the animal world. And with that being said, I also feel like this particular scene was a callback to earlier on in the book when Camille is explaining to Sailor how she got into caring for animals in the first place. And she tells her how a long time ago her very first friend was this wild rat that would show up around her house at the same time of day every single day, and how she would observe this animal and leave out food for it and take care of it, making it like a makeshift pet because she never really domesticated the rat. She just took care of it. So in the book, Camille refers to this rat as her first friend, her oldest friend. And I think this other comparison with Sailor seeing the rat and talking about how it noticed its own kind, I think this is also supposed to draw attention to the deep connection that Sailor and Camille felt with each other, their distinct friendship throughout the book. Now, there's another part where Sloley actually compares Sailor to Felice, black jaguar, who was actually born in the wild and then brought to Alcatraz to be held in captivity because his ecosystem was falling apart. And Camille talks about how they're very similar because they both have this affinity for needing to roam and graze large areas, and that they need these wide open spaces or else they would go crazy. And then Camille says something about how captivity is the hardest for creatures like them because they know that a better world exists. And so it's harder for them to adjust to this new state of the world. Because if you've read the book, then you remember that Sailor is actually in her 40s, I believe, while Camille is about 25 years old. So Sailor has witnessed the rapid destruction of the world, the extermination, basically, and extinction of all of these animals and of all of these species. And so for Sailor, it is a lot harder for her to reckon with the current state of the world, whereas Camille is a bit younger and she has not seen the way that the world has basically dissolved into pandemonium. This is all she has really ever known. So for Camille, it's a lot easier to just go with the status quo and just let things be as they are because she cannot envision a better world than what there is right now. Now, because we're on the topic of this, the ecological backdrop is absolutely devastating. And while Sloley does touch on the lore of how this all happened and lets us know about this fungal blight just consumes everything, I wish there had been a bit more about it. I realize this is a more character driven story. This is not so much very plot driven, which is fine. But I do think that when you go to write a dystopian world, there does need to be some level of immersing the reader in the catastrophes of this. So Camille lets us know about how the world has come to be in the state that it is now. And it partially reveals how humans are also trapped within these collapsing systems because, like I mentioned, the fungus has not affected us outside of just destroying the ecosystem. It doesn't kill humans, it doesn't make us sick or anything like that. It just kills pretty much everything else. And due to this collapse of the world that is happening around them, we don't get to see too much of it. This story focuses mostly on these characters and their immediate world, their immediate surroundings. But there is a point where Camille, so Titan and Kira, the other elephant that already exists on Alcatraz, they end up getting pregnant, right? And everybody in the zoo is so excited because one of them is an Asian elephant and one of them is an African elephant. So it was very unlikely that a pregnancy was ever going to happen. So when Kira does get pregnant, everybody is excited. This is a metaphor for hope, blooming, having a more positive outlook for the future and what it holds. So, unfortunately, trigger warning for what I'm going to say, but unfortunately, it is a stillbirth and everybody is absolutely devastated. This has completely shuttered the administrators, the security guards, the zookeepers. Everyone is absolutely devastated about the news that Kira had a stillbirth. And there's a moment where Camille realizes she draws a connection between the loss of hope from this stillbirth to the loss of hope within just society at large, and especially for the zookeepers on the island themselves. And she says, all of us were trapped on this island, our futures stillborn. So she's using metaphor to compare the fates of the animals and the zookeepers on this island to the fate of Kira's stillborn birth. And in this instance, I believe that the island is both literal and symbolic, obviously, because this is a prison not just for the animals, but for the humans there as well. Their lives are all confined by fear, control, and isolation. And eventually extinction, which is mirroring the fates of the animals that they are caring for. Now, at the heart of this story, and dare I say, one of the most important elements, if not the most important element of it, is Camille and Sailor's relationship. Now, we see Camille, she starts off as this shy, rule bound, almost invisible character. And with the arrival of Sailor, who is restless and rebellious and this catalyst for change, she's an animal rights activist and she is willing to challenge the system from within, risking everything. We see this with the way that she lets out this little brown bird that nobody would notice was missing and she frees it. We see this when she throws this party without the approval of the administrators and brings somebody from off the island onto the island to perform music, which is very much not allowed. And so Sailor is just doing these little things that are constantly defying and checking the system and showing Camille that resistance is not this one big, giant event that you push yourself to do. It is small acts of defiance that you build up gradually and gradually over time. And I think this is very important to note because by the end of it, we do see Camille engage in a similar act of resistance. And throughout the book, she goes along with Sailor's acts of resistance. Even though she is a bit timid about it, she does feel nervous and is still not fully willing to engage yet with these moments of activism that Sailor is spearheading. So their bond is charged with this unspoken affection, and Sailor gives Camille this nickname Birdie, which I do think is symbolic based off of how the book ends, and I'll get to that in a second. But by the end of the book, Camille has changed very profoundly from her relationship with Sailor. Now, here's one of my main gripes. Here's one of my biggest issues with this book, and is that I felt like there were very heavy sapphic undertones within their relationship. It felt like it teetered between queer baiting and the author's fear of maybe just diving in and giving them that kind of connection, giving them a romantic plot line. Because I found myself waiting throughout this book. From the very opening scene, they have this electrically charged moment where Titan's arrival from the helicopter or airplane or whatever it was. And these two don't know each other. They literally just met a few hours before. And already they're having this moment where they're standing in the crowd and their fingers are like brushing up against each other. And Camille was noting this and doesn't want to pull her fingers away and stuff like that. And there are a lot of moments like this throughout the book where they are sharing these very intimate moments that could be sapphic or just reminiscent of some kind of intimate friendship. I don't know. But I do feel like Camille, at the very least, is heavily crushing on Sailor. And between these secret moments of them, their nightly walks, and this weird rivalry between Joseph, who is Camille's boyfriend, and Sailor, who arrives and has taken all of Camille's attention right off the bat. So between all of this, I really did think that there was going to be a moment where these two hooked up or shared some kind of kiss or just professed their romantic love for one another. I don't know. Because there's also this part where it seems like Camille is experiencing comp het, where she's talking about how she was never in love with Joseph and that anytime they were hooking up and having sex, she did it not because she needed that part of him, referring to, you know, but she's talking about how she basically just did it because she needed that human contact, that physical contact and connection with a person. So between that and the charged moments that her and Sailor shared together, I really did think that they were going to have a thing. And I suppose maybe the author didn't want to do that because she didn't want to take away from the main focus of the story, which is Camille learning from Sailor how to be more rebellious, how to dream of a better world, and how to have hope. So I don't know. Maybe that's why. I don't know. Maybe I'm too gay for my own good because I really, really wanted them to have a moment like that. So, oh well. So now we're getting to the end of the book. Oh my God. It was shocking. I was not ready for it. I never believed that Sailor was going to give, because throughout the book, she's being pressured by this cartel to kidnap the crocodile named Achilles and put him in this petting zoo for rich people, basically. So we know that Sailor's never going to do that. She loves these animals way too much to ever even entertain the idea that she was going to make that happen. And we do learn after the tragic moment of her passing that she was sick with an incurable new form of Lyme disease, and she was basically going to die soon anyway. So she jumps off a tower and feeds herself to Achilles. That is how Sailor dies. Very dramatic. And obviously, it mirrored her own parents who used to raise alligators and crocodiles and stuff like that from in Florida. They died a very similar way. They took a bunch of morphine and then just went and fed themselves to their crocodiles and alligators. Wow, what an ending for that character. Now, obviously, this act of sacrifice is very symbolic for Sailor's love for Achilles, and basically knowing that her death, she wanted it to mean something. She wanted it because Achilles had been sick for a long time because he was not getting the proper nutrients that he needed, and she knew that if he ate her that he would get better, and he did. We learned that he does get better after he eats her. Wow, I was not expecting that. I'm not gonna lie. That was a very dramatic ending. It was a very whoa moment. Didn't understand exactly why Sailor wanted Camille to be present for that. I not obviously she's professing her love, but again, it feels more like a confession of a very friendly love or like a very deep, intimate, platonic kind of love. Didn't feel very romantic at all, but that's fine. That's whatever. The point is that I'm not sure why I suppose if Sailor had tried to do it before she fed herself to Achilles, then Camille would have known that something was wrong and she would have tried to stop her, I guess. That's the best way I could reason with it. But I just felt like that was very traumatizing for Camille, obviously, to watch your friend, this person that you've become so close to over the course of the last year, just jump off a tower and feed herself to a crocodile. So, yep. So obviously, after Sailor passes away, the owner, Mr. Pinkton, fires Camille and tells her, "You were part of this. I like you, but we cannot keep you on. That wouldn't be a good look. So you got to go." And she was like, "Okay, right." She can't really do much about it. But as she is leaving, as she's getting on the boat to go back to the mainland, she has smuggled a little warbler in her jacket and her shirt, and this is, again, a callback to her nickname Birdie. This is also a callback to that small act of defiance that Sailor had done where she had let the little brown bird free earlier in the book. So a lot of symbolism in this moment, a lot of heavily charged emotional drama in this moment of Camille taking up the mantle, stepping up, and doing what she knows that Sailor would have wanted from her, and show this idea of she's going to let this bird go, which setting a bird free is, I feel like, a pretty classic symbol of hope. I think it also symbolically represents Camille's newfound freedom. She has escaped the prison of Alcatraz, the zoo, right? And she is now going to hopefully look for something better. She was given Sailor's journal, so she has the contacts and the phone numbers for this supposed oasis for animals to run free, exist in happiness and peace, which is where Sailor had been smuggling animals when she worked at the Paris Zoo. At least that's what she thought was happening. We never get it confirmed. We never know for sure whether this place actually exists or not, but that's kind of the point, is we're meant to hope that it does. We're meant to hope that there is still some place in the world that we can dream of a better life for humans and for animals and for the world, right? So in conclusion, I would say that The Island of Last Things is ultimately a story about the courage to dream of a better world, to resist boldly, and to hold hope in the face of despair. We see Camille's journey from isolation to connection, from compliance to defiance. And I think it invites us to reflect on our own roles and position in the world that we live in now, and how important it is to adhere to this philosophy of engaging in small acts of defiance over time instead of hoping and praying that one day we have the courage to do something big and huge. Because pushing back on the things as they are, it's not going to happen one major event. It's about doing little things over the course of time, doing what we can when we can, and having the courage to engage in those acts. Now, before I close this out, I do want to say some of the critiques that I found on Goodreads were discussing how Sloley touched on the subject of climate crisis on a surface level in this novel. But I would argue that the point of this book was not to dive into the horrors of climate change in regard to the world, but how societal collapse and the loss of hope imprisons us in our own minds. Because honestly, we cannot change the world if we cannot even begin to envision a better one. And in that respect, I feel like this book hit the nail on the head and did, in fact, highlight that very idea and explored it with more than enough depth. But, if you've read the book, you tell me. Did you feel like this book was shallow and surface level? Or did you think that this book had profound messaging that was articulated well and clear for the reader? Let me know. If anything, I do think that this book was a lovely reminder that we need to keep hoping and resisting and carrying together. Until next time, y'all.